and Ambler came to mind, and he's the one I realized suddenly that everybody's quoting Green and First and whatever, and nobody's
No, but
mentioning
Eric Ambler,
Ambler.
oh no, I mention him in everything that I do as an influence on my work. In a lot of ways, he invented or helped to invent the modern thriller. His works like Journey into Fear are just sort of classic in their form and story. And I really feel that I come much more out of that tradition, the British tradition, than the American one in terms of thriller writing.
I do too. I mean, I was thinking that to me, Ambler is the most direct ancestor,
Definitely.
Of what you write. So, the Kill Artist. Who is Gabriel Allon?
He, as a young man in 1972, he was an art student at the Beit Salal Academy of Art in Jerusalem, just fresh out of his compulsory army service. And something happened in Munich at the Olympic Games, the Munich Olympic Massacre, and the government of Israel decided to hunt down the perpetrators of that and kill them. And Gabriel is one of the guys that they draft for the hit team. He is a multilingual child of European Holocaust survivors, German Holocaust survivors, so he can work in Europe. And he is also, later in life, becomes one of the world's finest art restorers. And they use that as his cover to move him around for his work. He came to me in just a flash of lightning, honestly. I was walking down the street with my wife, and as I said, I was just working on the sketches for this guy. And she says to me, "Don't forget, we're having dinner with David Bull tonight." And I stop in my tracks. David Bull, a friend of mine, truly is one of the world's finest art restorers. And I said, that's it. He's an art restorer. He's an assassin he's an art restorer. And I put the idea to David at dinner that night. He says, great, let's do it. So he takes me into the National Gallery in London, and you walk in there and there's a Titian on this table and a Monet on this easel, and it's just incredible. And spent several days just teaching me about it. The techniques, the technical aspects of it, but really how to think like a restorer. And that's what has really made the series special, in my opinion, is that Gabriel, when he's doing his intelligence work, thinks like an art restorer always. And it's also put him in some wonderful settings, and for example, when he was investigating the Vatican's role in the Holocaust and the Confessor, he was restoring a church in Venice. It was an appropriate metaphor, in my opinion, and it makes the work special.
It really does. I think that's a wonderful scene that opens the Confessor. Kind of makes me think about Michelangelo and how he must have been lying, to paint
I found
his
something
ceiling.
interesting on my book tour. Fellow who has been going to writing seminars at the University of Iowa told me that they were teaching that chapter as character introduction at a seminar at the University of Iowa writing program, and I was just tickled pink because it's one of the best things I've ever written, and I just love that imagery there.
I did too. It's a brilliant scene, and of course it also gives you a chance to write about Venice, even if it's not central to the rest of the story, which, it's just such a romantic and interesting city.
But it was sort of central to it in that, in the role of the ghetto and what took place there, and so it was more than just a pretty backdrop, although it was a pretty backdrop, and I enjoyed my research there.
But you're right, the ghetto, the whole thing. I was just in Rome and went to visit the synagogue in Rome, which I hadn't realized.
When were you there?
In November.
Were there still soldiers all
Absolutely.
around it? Isn't that lovely?
I'm myself Episcopalian, but my husband is from an important Jewish family, and I try to haul him along to see his own tradition. I'm actually more interested than he is. But yes, it was very unnerving. The front is all, you have to go around to a side door, and there's a museum there. But what I hadn't really thought about, and I know, that this seemed incredible that I wouldn't have figured it out before. I understood the ghetto in principle as a place where Jews lived. What I didn't really grasp was that they were actually locked
Confined
in.
there.
And what it meant in terms of, well, they were very good in Rome. They did a program when you visited the synagogue about the ghetto, about the fact that it was flooded by the Tiber. It was before they had come along and done any sort of real flood control. How unhealthy it was, and it was a picture that grew so sharp for me that I just hadn't given thought to before.
It was a sad and troubled history, the Pope's Jews, as they were.
Exactly.
I mean, they lived under the direct rule of the Vatican and the popes, and while Jews all around Europe were being emancipated, they were held under some pretty deplorable conditions and were trotted out once a year and humiliated, ritually humiliated for the entertainment of the popes. And it's a sad and tragic story. And for me, it was particularly painful to go to services in the evening and have to pass through all that security and to see a community spill out into the street afterwards, guarded by Carbonari men. It left a deep mark on me, and I think some of that sadness, I don't think there's any other word for it, just sort of crept into the tone of the confessor. But of course, it was the setting that the great synagogue of Rome where you were, that was where my fictitious Pope Paul VII went to make his great pronouncement at the end of the book. And I think that ultimately why the confessor worked was that it was a very hopeful book. As I meant it to be.
Why did you decide, this is another question I always find interesting, what is there that's sort of magic about a trilogy? So often, you hardly ever hear about anybody sitting down to write a quintet or a tetralogy.
Well, it all comes from Christianity, I mean, right? Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Threes. For me, I've called it an accidental trilogy because I didn't set out to write it. But I think that, look, it's a story, beginning, middle, end. It's threes. And when I think about stories, every single book I think about it in thirds.
Sort of classical play structure.
It is classical play structure. Yeah. There's something about threes that the rhythm of it that works for us, whether it's music, a play, a book, 3 parts.
Although Alan, I mean, he comes along, Gabriel, in his first book, The Kill Artist, you actually do the quote trilogy. It starts with the English Assassin, and then the Confessor. I call it
a trilogy or cycle of 3 books. Within a broader series.
Right, and the theme that you're addressing more specifically in these 3 books is what?
I have labeled it the unfinished business of the Holocaust. In the first book, he dealt with Switzerland and the complicity of the Swiss banking system and Nazi art looting. Confessor obviously dealt with the Vatican. And this one, I had hinted throughout the series, or said throughout, that he was a child of Holocaust survivors. But I had never really walked up to it in terms of what it truly meant to him and his character. And I wanted to write about it, but also dramatize it. And not just tell it. And the result of that was this plot that I created for A Death in Vienna, where he is pursuing not only a man who is a major Nazi war criminal and a mover and shaker in the Austrian political scene, but a man who, as he finds out about midway through the story, had an encounter with his mother late in the war on the death march from Birkenau. I discovered something in my research and in talking to children of Holocaust survivors, and that is that people who lived through this experience oftentimes did not tell their children anything about it. And that was true of the Elan household. And it was true of a lot of families, particularly in Israel. Tough people, tough society, move on. The Holocaust itself was discussed endlessly, but people didn't really talk about their own personal experiences. And Gabriel knew nothing about what happened to his mother. And not to get into a lot of psychobabble, but it was sort of an unresolved. He brings some closure to that chapter of his life through this story.